Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board. My name's Councillor Andy Scopes and I'm the chair of this board. It's really full and packed agenda today, so I'll try and keep us on track the best I can. So we'll start with some introductions, if that's okay. So I already said I'm Andy Scopes. I represent the Beeston Holbeck ward, and we'll go to my left.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm the clerk to the board.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Morning, it's Mahalia France, councillor for Moulton and Meanwood.
Councillor Goer Almers from Beeston Holbeck Ward. Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Caroline Gruen, also from Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Councillor Sharon Burt, Middleton Park Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carville and Farsley Ward.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Carl Waller, Communications and Marketing Team.
Good morning, Tim Rollett, Intelligence and Policy Service as well.
Morning all, Mike Eakins, Acting Head of Intelligence and Policy.
We'll come back to you, okay, Neil?
Neil Evans, Director of Resources and Housing. Resources even, just going back in time there, sorry about that.
Mariana Paxton, Chief Officer, Strategy and Improvement, and soon to be Director of Resources.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Exec Board Member for Resources.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale.
Councillor Samforth, Councillor for Harewood Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Diane Chapman for Rothwell Ward.
Morning, everyone. Rob Clayton, Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Okay, back to Alex.
Oh, good morning. Sorry about that. I've now got a card. I'm Alex Watson from HR.
Super, thank you very much. Hopefully, if you're watching online, you haven't got vertigo from that. If you're interested, all the online paper, all the papers we're looking at are online, so you can search them in any good search engine. Okay, I'm going to pass on to Debbie for the first few formal items.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Under agenda item 3, there are no late items. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests? And I'll take silence as there are none. Agenda item 5, there are no apologies, Chair.
Super, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to the minutes first. Just on the minutes, I'm proposing an amendment. So at the last meeting, Tom Reardon noted that he did reverse mentoring with one of the staff network chairs. And I think that's a really important thing and something that we should make sure is on the public record. So I'm proposing we add that into the minutes. Yeah, second that. Great. Thanks, Councillor Almers, for seconding that. So if there's any questions, or are you happy to accept that change? Super. Okay, so let's move on to matters arising, and I'll start with Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few items from our last meeting. On minute 66, which is the EDI update and staff networks item. Just to say that I'm pursuing with HR colleagues some additional information that was requested by the board. So that's around a breakdown of staff characteristics across various services and directorates. Minute 67, similarly with the devolution item, I'm in contact with Ben Still's office regarding some additional information around policing and the PCC and adult education that the board requested. Of course, Chair. Yeah.
Can we just highlight that we want the information as soon as possible, please? Thank you.
Noted, Chair. Yep, that's fine. And then lastly, the work programme, which I minute 69, which I referenced in the pre-meeting, just to say we're working on a EDI working group for the board, which I think is likely to come in early March. So just to flag that up in the public meeting as well. Thank you, Chair.
Super. Anything else from board members? Okay, I can't see anyone indicating. So we'll move on to the first sort of major item on the agenda item 7, which is page 19 of your meeting packs. This is a really important item around consultation and mass communication, which I think Mariana wants to introduce. You can assume that we've read the papers, but if there's anything important you want to draw out, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, just perhaps to just bring the paper to life a little bit, it's worth just saying, as you said, Chair, this is a really, really important set of functions. It's quite complicated, 3 interrelated issues, I think, in relation to kind of mass communications, consultation engagement, and also the contact centre. The report highlights, you know, what a couple of fairly small functions do, but how important this is that it's everybody's business, so that those who are engaging with the public are experts in that domain. And that but we do have some really good expertise. The report's been really useful to pull together for us. It's given us a few ideas of what we might do, which are, captured in that section towards the end. Otherwise, really interested to take questions and suggestions from members. Thank you.
Have we got questions from members? Councillor Firth.
Thank you. Don't know what happened there. Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask a little bit about the road testing of consultations by the team, really in terms of the public face. I use a particular example of a live consultation at the moment, which is the 6-week consultation on the SAP remittal, the Site Allocations Plan remittal. And I just wondered really if you could talk through road testing, because I'm getting a number of concerns from residents about being able to fill it in terms of being able to understand easily what people are being asked for, and also more generally what they're actually seeing in terms of actually being able to understand it when they actually get into it in the first place. Thank you.
Good morning. Yeah. As we mentioned in the report, it's generally a directorate-led setup that we have. So we've got a very small team that provide as much support as we can, but in some areas we're not involved in every single piece of work that goes on out there. So I'm not actually aware of that piece of work, so I can't comment on that one. But for other pieces of work, we just use the experience that we've had for doing many previous consultations and the feedback that we get from residents on that. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. I mean, as Frank said, that's something that is being led by City Development Directorate. I mean, that said, through the support that we provide, we do try to sort of encourage colleagues and support colleagues with some general principles around good consultation and engagement, around things like using plain English language wherever possible, which I appreciate we don't always get right as a council, but it's certainly the direction we're trying to travel in. And we note in the report that, and Mariana mentioned, through producing this, one of the things it's sort of got us thinking about is how we can expand that support to perhaps overcome some of the issues that residents might be facing with accessing consultations. And one of the things we're thinking of doing and planning to do is what we call a Let's Talk session for internal colleagues delivering consultation and engagement that will help make it a little bit more accessible for them to get that support with how to pitch things, so that it's understandable for the citizen, I suppose. That said, we know there can be circumstances where it's a little bit trickier, and we've encountered this with consultations we've done in the past where there might be specific legal requirements of how things are put and how things are phrased and presented, which is always really tricky to navigate. But certainly we will do the best we can to sort of do explainers or that kind of thing. And something to say the report has prompted is us thinking about how to expand that support so that there are less of the issues, even if we can't eradicate them completely going forward. I hope that helps a little bit.
Well, no, thank you to both of you for those explanations. I think the real thing here is the fact that it's about making sure that we don't work in silos from each other. I appreciate that you may not have the resources or the breadth to be able to do that, but it is slightly concerning unless you're able to give any more meat on the bone in terms of the cross-department working that's happening to actually make sure that we're actually learning from mistakes that are happening or potentially from good things that are being done when it comes to certain consultations. I know that, for example, that the council is particularly keen, or WICA is particularly keen to look at having digital sort of playroom is the wrong word, but you go in and it's certainly set up in an interesting way, more like some would say a game than it is actually an actual survey to find out people's opinions and try and test people in different ways. And so certainly I'd appreciate if there's any meat on that, because I think the biggest problem that we also have found, which I welcome some of the proposals that are mentioned in the report, is the fact that I think it was just over a year ago, there were 2 consultations on the A64, York Road, at the very same time, one run by this council and one run by Wyker. And it meant that there was a serious conflict between actually people understanding which one they were replying to and what information they should be providing for which. Could you give some clarity on what you're doing with other organisations that have similar responsibilities to yourself to be able to do that? And as a second question, very cheekily, what usage are you using of Facebook in terms of, is it something that you're looking to expand the amount of work that's happening? I know that the council is doing particular work on voter registration and other things that it wants to promote, and how big a budget in terms of they're providing to actually ensure we connect with our residents in the most modern way possible. Thank you.
It's not working for you today. Okay, so Debbie's just going to go down and check the card, so hopefully Mariana can comment.
Sorry about that. Yeah, quite a lot in there, Councillor Firth. I think the first thing to say in terms of, kind of how we work across the council, we do constantly try and work across and join things up, but we are a big organisation. We do have this topic periodically on corporate leadership team and things like best council leadership team, to try and encourage everybody. And as Mike said, potentially looking to do more training and development on this area with more middle managers, so that, we get those connections and help people to understand why it's important to do those connections. Because I think sometimes people are really keen to get on with engaging on what they want to engage on, which is a good thing. But obviously we also want them to, do that, being cognizant of other developments as well. So, we'll take away an action to continually improve that as best we can. In terms of the question about other organisations, again, I think we would need to take an action to talk to the combined authority, or have a think about who else might be the main organisations that we'd want to talk to, where there might be those main clashes. And we could perhaps try and work through that with the localities team as well, who may be quite well cited on those things. In terms of Facebook and digital playrooms, it's not something that we have looked into in the team so far, I don't think. Facebook obviously is used by the comms and marketing team a fair bit. And, I guess we're constantly looking at some of those new tools and how we can engage differently, whilst also keeping hold of some of those traditional ones, because we do want to engage everybody, and not everybody is comfortable with those digital channels.
I can just add to that as well. For the in terms of the digital playroom, it's something we did a few years ago for the budget consultation. We carried out we kind of gamified the budget, so you could it was it was delivered a bit like a game where you chose what costs you wanted to apply to what, and it worked very well. But there is quite a big cost attributed to putting those in place. It's about £5,000 to £10,000 to do. So it's something we use sparingly. So we haven't used that recently, but it is an approach that we've used in the past, and it's something we do consider.
No, thank you very much. I think the epitome of it is the fact that maybe I have crossed wires with what Wyker are doing, but I think that with as many of my residents feel, with the amount of consultations that come out for different subjects, you can get confused between which one's providing which. Can I ask then, as a result, very quickly, what sort of statistical analysis are you doing to ensure that the range of consultations that we're doing, given that people feel that they've got consultation fatigue sometimes, how are we making sure we get the best response possible when we're continually consulting on various different issues, sometimes repeatedly over a couple of years? Thank you.
Yeah, we do, when we're supporting services, we do recommend that they carry out, where possible, the minimum amount of consultation. Not always, well, not the minimum, but enough. We don't. There's often presumptions that you need to get in touch with absolutely everybody for something to be accurate, but we can use statistical calculations to give them some guidance on how much they actually need to do. So we often do that. And it keeps the cost down as well. So there is a cost attributed to doing this kind of consultation, and obviously we don't want to carry out infinitely more than we need to. So yeah, we as part of the guidance we do tell people how much they would need to carry out for the minimum to be accurate. So I think this microphone's a bit dicky. Is it okay? Is it coming on? Yeah. Okay.
Frank, can I just say, when you're talking to it, don't lean into it, keep away from it, and then it won't break up as much.
Super, thank you. Okay, Councillor Flynn.
Thanks very much indeed. The mention of the calendar of future corporate communications, could you tell us a wee bit more about that? You know, what the access to it is likely to be?
Yeah, I can try and speak to that a little bit. So we use a program that's part of Microsoft Teams called Planner. So the idea is that teams that have any individual directorate or team will have access to that shared resource and be able to coordinate anything that's incoming or outgoing and see where those overlaps are. So it refers to the earlier question a little bit as well, because it means we'll be able to judge a little bit better what's coming up, and also, you know, things where we've got multiple overlaps and actually sort of put one thing out rather than putting three different things out in theory. But it's still in its very early stages at the moment.
Is it a purely internal calendar, and who will have access to it other than service leads?
It is at present, but we're in that process with RDS, looking at how we can sort of open that up to external providers as well, and partners that we work with. So I know some teams do have access to, you know, that resource externally, but I think that's probably the way forward. Test it internally, see how it works for us, and then work with partners to open it up a little bit more, so we get that broader picture.
Okay, super, thank you. Okay, Councillor Gruen.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points you've touched on, but specifically, good quality consultation is mentioned several times in the paper, and I just wondered if you could define good quality consultation for me, so I understand what the teams are aiming at. Second point is at paragraph 4, where it says the two teams work side by side, etc., and the example given is the budget consultation or staff engagement surveys. Could you give me a concrete example of how that's worked well, because it's an example that you've chosen to share? And my final point is the voice and influence team are mentioned in here as making consultation accessible for young people and children. And I've been involved to some degree with local plan update 1 and 2 in the planning department with that team to make it more accessible to children. In your view, how successful has that piece of work been? And what do you see their role as being? Thank you.
Maybe if Frank goes on the first one, Mike on the second, and then I can maybe pick up the third.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can sound a little better this time. Okay, so on good quality consultation, one of the key things we'd start with would be the kind of the legal necessities. So we'd be following the SEDLI criteria to make sure everything's legally as good as it can be. So that's a 4-point criteria about how to consult. So it's about the timeliness, ensuring that consultation is actually genuine, so that it's not happening after a decision's already been made. What other kind of things go in there? And that it's accessible, things like that. So that gives us a very good backbone. That's a legal backbone to how we should do these things. The kind of support that we can provide otherwise is around, I think Mike mentioned earlier, plain English, but also making sure that the questions are fit for purpose. There's no bias in there, and that they're gonna draw out the kind of findings that people are looking to understand. So a lot of that goes in there. Other things that we would help with around methodology, so ensuring that the piece of research or the consultation is it gets the right people, and that it's not excluding people. So there's all these those kind of areas that we would support services to ensure that they have good consultation. But I'll stop there.
Thanks, Anthony. And just to come in on the sort of the second part of what you mentioned in terms of those few examples of where we think things have worked well. We touch on sort of staff engagement surveys, and just so, I mean, people may be aware, but if not, traditionally we've done a full staff satisfaction survey every 1 to 2 years. But the team did, to give credit, a brilliant job through the sort of period of the pandemic, and we massively escalated the amount that we were talking to staff, recognizing that people weren't, a good proportion of our staff weren't in physical workplaces anymore and were at home. So the team introduced, alongside HR, something that that you'll have seen, I'm sure, the Wellbeing Pulse surveys. And I think we delivered 5 of those in total over the pandemic period, and they were really aiming to be sort of really quick to fill in, not demanding for members of staff, but quick snapshots of how people were feeling across a range of things about their role at the council, but also their personal well-being as well. And the findings of those were, we were able to compare those over time and fed regularly into CLT discussions and directorate level management discussions as well, really to shape the support that was offered to staff through the pandemic period and to look after their well-being. So I think that was just one example of the team being able to very, very quickly sort of significantly scale up activity around a priority area. And it's something we've done in other places too, but was really valuable for the organisation through the pandemic.
Councillor Graham, perhaps just to finish off on that one, mentioning the budget consultation, because you asked how as well the 2 teams that we've named in the report work together. So on that one, very much it's Frank working with finance colleagues to design that survey and how that's going to get the results that we need. It's always in a short time frame, as you know, because it's always lands between sort of December exec board and February full council, which allowing time to write things up. Obviously, the closing date is just passed. And then in terms of comms, that's then about how we use our social media channels, member channels, partner channels, how we try and get through community committees and use the localities team to make sure that we can promote that kind of stuff wherever it's possible, so that we get as many responses as possible. So that's just another bit of a practical example, a concrete example about how those 2 teams work together. And then your last question about the voice and influence and the planning, I don't know the specifics of how successful that has been. I'd have to take that away to, kind of ask some questions and try and understand that. My sense of the work that the voice and influence team do generally in terms of getting young people's voices through into the city and into major developments is that it's a finite capacity, but what they do is very powerful, and it does enable us to get access to young voices and perspectives, and indeed parents and carers that perhaps we might not otherwise get. But very happy to take away if you want more detail on the specifics.
Thank you. I mean, what drove those questions is really that I think at the heart of consultation is engaging with your audience, and you've said things about reaching the right people and using the right methodology to reach the right people, etc. But at the heart of it, it's actually motivating your audience to want to interact with you. And you would expect with my background that I'd be very interested in how the council is doing that for children and young people. So yes, I would be very interested in some sort of evidence or information around how well that's working.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gruen. Okay, Councillor Burke, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's quite a straightforward question, really, and it's building on what Councillor Flynn asked. So paragraph 30, the shared teams calendar. Quite often, members are missed out of that loop in my experience. And I use the recent consultation about charging for parks, which is causing a huge amount of discussion and consternation, well, in my ward, and I assume within other wards as well. So I think it would be hugely useful if we as members could view that calendar so that we would know in advance what was coming up. And I did hope Councillor Flynn were going to take that a bit further. So I don't know, I don't mean for us to input to it, but perhaps we could view it.
Would be happy to take that away, Councillor, and have a think about when and how we could do that. As Carl said, it's in its developmental stages at the moment. And I think what we'd want to do before, you know, we enabled wider access to was make sure it did have the bulk of things on it. And I think at the moment it probably hasn't. So what we wouldn't want to do is claim that we've got this planning tool that then actually it only does give partial information. So, I mean, the other thing I would happily commit to in the meantime, and I think we try and do this anyway, but where we do the member updates is always try and let you know what consultation is going on. And I'd be happy to modify those, for example, to put a special section that said, you know, current consultations that are live, at least in the short term, to allow us to get the planner more up to date, if that would work for you, Councillor.
Thank you, but perhaps more useful would be consultations that are planned, that are coming, so that it's twofold, isn't it? It's the live ones and the ones that are coming up next week or next month or whatever, so that we can kind of work within the wards to make sure people are aware of that.
Yep, happy to pick that up in the short term in the member update and then a longer term aspiration through the planner. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can just add to what Marianne has just responded to in terms of the consultation and any specific consultation that Councillor Burke mentioned around the parks. So there are two things really to share on that one. So the whole budget consultation, proposals consultation went live in December, and any specific service review that comes from that will also be under consultation in its own right as a service review. So there's two layers to that consultation. Obviously, the whole breadth of the budget proposals that you had and the individual things within it. As a general, and then any specifics that will now flow. So consultation should start on any service reviews, including the one that you mentioned, Councillor Burke.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Burke. And actually, highways do this. One thing highways do that's quite good is they often send us something if they're going to do a customer care on the street or something like that. And they send us the letter they're sending to residents, and it's that sort of thing I think you mean. And then we know when we get an email from residents. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Ritchie next.
Thank you. I do appreciate how difficult it is to get people to engage. Quite often it's a complicated process. So, for example, the budget consultation invited you to click on links to read reports. So it's quite demanding, and I'm not sort of been pontificating to the people of Leeds for not contributing, because let's remember, only 9 out of 99 members responded to a simple highways question. Do you like these, the format of the reports that you get? Only 9. So we can't, you know, people in glass houses and all that. My question is actually, I'm interested to know, pardon, yeah, I did do, yeah, thank you. I always do. The question I've got is, I'm keen to know how representative the responses are of the city. You do some equality screening at the end of them, but I'm really interested in postcode responses. So how they're skewed towards certain postcodes. You know, do people in my ward respond to consultations, be it the local plan that's been mentioned, the budget, the recent transport consultations? And I think that's the sort of data that Scrutiny Board might be presented at Scrutiny Board, actually, and we look at how we can improve that. Just on Facebook, I think people, I know paid ads work differently, but things are coming through on your feed. You might see something, and I'm not sure how many people, if you don't click on it then, it might be lost in the system. And just on a recent one, Culture 2023, I Facebooked the fact that there were tickets still available. 2 issues with that. When I posted out what a wonderful evening it was at that free event, people were saying, I wish I'd known about it. And there's been lots of Facebook from the council, from the culture website, from members and so on. So still people missing it. And secondly, yesterday I got a notification telling me my post of it in Bramley community page was against Facebook rules on the. So I always get this happened last time.
So hopefully this is a test at 10:30. We'll just give it a few seconds and then we'll start again.
Right.
Hey, thanks, Councillor Ritchie.
So it said it was a violation of their community standards, and all I posted was a link to Culture 2023 saying tickets still available, free tickets still available. But I only found that out yesterday, which is rather bizarre. So that didn't get posted. So what I'm getting at is there are challenges around the use of Facebook and how Facebook works. But my main question, as I opened up with, was keen to know how representative those responses are and what lessons we can learn or improve from those.
Maybe if I start and then hand to Frank. I mean, I think often really good consultation reports will include that in them when they get reported, say, for example, as part of executive board papers or, delegated decision notices, because they'll have been done, as we've said, by the service, and they will pick up that kind of representative information, be that around protected characteristics, if we've been able to capture it, or postcode data. One of the things we've said in the report is that we will try and, moving forward, we will try and do an annual report on consultation. So we'll try and bring that kind of thing together, so that sort of information together, so that if we were able to say, for example, across the year there've been 20 reports done, we might be able to say something about, what the overall position of the representation was across all of those, because as Frank says, one of the things we do try and advise is trying to make them representative. We just need to be careful about things like statistical viability and making sure that we don't kind of compromise anything by doing that. But that, I'd suggest that we do try and look at whether or not we can do that. And on Facebook, maybe we can run a member seminar about, the whys and wherefores of Facebook advertising from colleagues who do understand and know that, because I wouldn't profess to understand that myself. But we can always, there will be colleagues in the comms team who understand how those algorithms and things work and what those rules are.
And if I can just add to that, just a little more detail around an example, I suppose, the current budget consultation, which we're analysing at the moment. We did get a good response from that. So we got around 1,700 responses, even though the subject is broadly, it's a financial consultation at the end of the day. So some might be put off because it's a little dry. So we still got really good level of response there. And when we look at how representative that is of the people of the city, it comes in at +/-2, which is really highly accurate. That's really good. So that's going to be a really useful piece of data going forward. We do have we asked people there for the first half of their postcode. We're often reluctant to ask for full postcode because it creates more difficulties with GDPR, because especially if you want to ask around protected characteristics, before you know it, you really know exactly who someone is and where they live. So it does cause some problems. But we've got the first part of the postcode, and it's something I'll take back. That I'll certainly do some analysis by that in that report and going forward where we have, because if that's still useful to know if something's like LS6 or LS8 or wherever, if that gives you a little bit of a ballpark of whether whether it's in your ward, then that's still helpful, I suppose.
Do you want to go back, Councillor Ritchie? Super, thank you very much. Thanks for those responses. Okay, we're bringing Councillor Carlisle next.
Thanks. It probably builds on what we had then as well, because one of the things I'm interested in is that balance between online consultations and the kind of more focus group, hearing people's voices, because online consultations are really powerful ways of getting to a lot of people very easily and quickly. But it often captures those most engaged voices, and it may only get to those who are able to access it or who happen to see it on their feeds, as noted. The data also does need verifying afterwards to check it is representative and somebody's not filled the same thing in 8 times trying to change it or whatever. But I'm thinking of, I mean, there's an example I saw in Highways and Transport where there was a commonplace consultation and then it was backed up with a doorstep consultation. It was a very localized example, which made it easier. But actually, when you looked at the difference between those, it was a subtly different outcome, but one which could have affected the decision made in that regard. Because the feedback from the doorstep is a more wider gathering of the community there. You could say it's everyone in a sense, because we've at least tried to contact everyone, and you get that more useful feedback from the discussion. It's sometimes hard to get those complexities of a decision across in an online consultation. I guess you mentioned the citizens panel in the report, so I just wanted to hear a bit more about that and how we balance it. But it's things like, if I think back to the big Leeds climate conversation, we had that, which was a really big set of data and information from people, but I always balance it in my head then against the views of the climate jury we had alongside it, which were people that had a real good amount of time to get into the issues and came up with some really useful solutions that they wanted to see. So how do we balance those two? Because I think there is a very different outcome that you may get from different ones, and I guess it adds to Councillor Ritchie's point around then how representative it is. I mean, there are some highways consultations where you get quite often more men than women filling in the response just because of where it is, how people have seen it when they've been going out. But actually, as we know, as a city, we've got more women than men in the city, so it's making sure that view is captured.
Yeah, the need for that balance of what we'd call both quantitative, so those kind of online survey methods and things like that, and more qualitative, like focus groups, things like that, is something we're very aware of. It's an area which became a particular issue during the pandemic because everything became more and more pushed online, and there were less and less of these more certainly face-to-face kind of sessions, and it's something we're encouraging currently. The ways we support it within our little team is we've got this resource of information for staff, and there's some really good stuff in there about how to carry out these focus groups, and we do provide support in that, and we've carried out focus groups ourselves in the past, not so much recently, but we have carried them out. They're unfortunately quite resource they take quite a lot of resource to carry out, so it's harder to do them with a small team, but it's certainly something which we can support other officers to do, and we do very much, we see the need for that, and that it can really provide a bit of meat on the bones of what's otherwise maybe just the bare bones of the learning. That broad discussion can provide a lot more information. So yeah, we do recognise that. I mean, going forward, we've already mentioned we're going to be looking at Let's Talk sessions going forward, and I think that would be another one that maybe it would be within that session, or potentially a further session just purely on that to support services across the council with delivering that.
Just as thanks for that. I mean, what I would say is certainly on a lot of the bigger consultations that take place, the really large sort of significant ones, I think we do probably quite well on getting that mixed model. And certainly you mentioned some of the transport stuff recently. If I think back to the Best City Ambition consultation last year, we did the vast majority of that was done face to face in a more qualitative style. And then the regular work that we do with Housing Leeds on sort of tenant engagement and satisfaction takes a very mixed model as well. And what you say is quite right. And Frank knows more of the detail than I do. Not that I think we necessarily need to go into it, but the online results certainly deliver look slightly different to the stuff we do over the telephone, for example, where you're having a more sort of connected conversation, I suppose, with an individual. So I think we do reasonably well. You mentioned the citizens panel, and we've done a refresh of the citizens panel recently to try to make sure that the membership we have on that is active, and where we can to make that more representative of the city. So as we continue with that sort of refresh and relaunch work, I think we'll be looking to remind colleagues that the citizens panel is there and available as a engaged pool of people who can be worked with to design focus groups and things, and then working with people like Voice and Influence in Children's as well. I know we do quite a lot with them, and through the name's completely gone, the sort of youth parliament reps and there's a council that I forget the name of, but with young people, and try to work with them as well. So I think you're right, there's always more to do. And now we're emerging from that sort of pandemic period. I think we have some of the tools available to us to remind colleagues about routes they can go through to get that balance of consultation when they're doing it.
Super, thank you very much for those questions and comments. Just as just like to thank you for this report, and I really welcome the idea of an annual report as well. The next steps are really useful. So paragraph 30. Just as I close the item, just want to comment on paragraph 32 and the backdrop of the limited resources. And I think it's probably worth just going back and considering the financial and reputational possible cost of getting communications wrong, both to the contact centre and to the council as a whole. And so just whether there is enough finance and enough power within the comms team to make sure our communications are spot on, they do say what we want them to say, are in sort of really plain English. So just and I feel like those are some of sort of an underlying theme in a lot of the questions. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm sure you'll come back in a not too distant future. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next item, which is the Best City Ambition update. And Mike, are you giving us an introduction? As I say all the time, you can assume everyone's read the paper, but if there's anything in particular you want to draw out, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this is quite a broad paper, as you'll have picked up when looking through it. So not intending to dig too much into any of the detail, but to give a very brief overview of what it covers, and then happy to take any questions. So members will remember that the full council adopted the Best City Ambition last February, and agreed at that point that the current 2022-23 year we would treat as a transitional year, where we move from the previous arrangements on the Best Council Plan to the new ones for the Best City Ambition. And what this report covers really is a relatively high level overview of that transition work that's been going on. One of the key items that's in there, and you'll see in the appendix, is the move to a new set of key performance indicators, and the introduction separate to this of the Leeds Social Progress Index as well. So I won't touch too much on performance, because as I appreciate, we'll probably come on to that in the discussion. But what we've also done is look at the council's overall strategic planning framework, and try to refresh that and bring that into line with the Best City Ambition wherever possible. Two sort of big factors there that have affected the decision not to refresh the Best City Ambition now, as we might normally have done, and instead to look to do that later on this year. And that's the new or the refreshed inclusive growth strategy and health and wellbeing strategy, which are in train at the moment. And I think I'm right in saying by sort of the spring, summer, we will have both of those. So we figured it makes a bit more sense to just pause on refreshing the ambition and wait for that work to be concluded. But we've also looked at the other range of strategies, and you'll appreciate the council has a lot of strategies currently, and I think it's broadly agreed there is scope to try to reduce the number and bring them together where it makes sense to do so. So through the piece of work that we've done, and is noted in the report, we're really aiming to do that, and have picked out a small number of key strategies around which we're encouraging colleagues in the broader council to sort of coalesce and to reflect our vision and ambitions in those things where possible, and outside of that to focus more on action plans and delivery rather than creating additional strategy documents. The paper also touches on the breakthrough priorities that were launched as part of the Best City Ambition, the initial 5, and the Appendix 2 includes an update on each of those. And then we're also still actively thinking about something that I know came out very strongly when we did the Best City Ambition engagement with community committees, which is about how to make this meaningful at a community level. And in the most recent LGA peer review towards the back end of last year, the overall message around the Best City Ambition was really encouraging in terms of the ownership that is already felt of this, both within the council and the city. But something that also came out there was about the work going on at a community level and making that connection between the two. So it was certainly already on the agenda, and I know communities directorate colleagues are actively looking at things like local area plans, which I think they're talking to community committees about. But on the back of the peer review as well, we've got an additional oomph, I suppose, to get on with that work and make that really meaningful. So certainly over the course of this year, there'll be discussions with community committees about that, and we will bring the Best City ambition back alongside as well. The paper also touches on how the Best City ambition is fed into our comms activities, some of which we've just spoken about, so I won't go into too much detail. I think I'll pause there, Chair, but obviously happy to go into anything members are interested in.
Super, thank you very much. If you want to indicate if you want to speak, but I'll start with Councillor Flynn.
Thanks, Andrew. A couple of these things will link into the previous subject as well, Mike, but I think the answer is probably more appropriate to Neil. On procurement, looks like our purchases from local suppliers is heading up towards sort of 50% or so, which I absolutely agree with. But I just wonder what are there any sort of adverse effects in terms, I hate the expression, but value for money? Are we getting the same sort of value for money as we would have done if we'd have gone, sort of wiser than our local suppliers? The complaints responded to within timelines appear to be, it's certainly in some directors, absolutely abysmal. And I know that there's a task and finish group looking at children and families at the moment. I know that one originally looked at adults and health, and I just wonder if there's a case for the other directorates having a similar examination in some sort of depth. And lastly, I don't see any data at all on freedom of information requests, which, given the work that you're doing, Mike, seems rather peculiar.
Yes, okay, take those turns. So on procurement, we obviously promote the work with local SMEs, but actually in terms of final evaluation, actually the local connection is a bit of a tiebreaker. So you would still need to demonstrate that you were the best value for money. So we aren't seeing any compromise on value for money. We take it into account in terms of judging people where they're close together, rather than it's actually being something which will lead to poor value for money for the authority. In terms of the complaints performance, clearly in a number of areas that is a concern. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a vicious circle at times where actually a team will be overwhelmed with work, and therefore you get more complaints, and then the same people are responding to it. And an area which you've picked up on, there's been a very large increase in the numbers of families who actually are requesting educational statements around support. That's really gone through the roof. Obviously, then staff are doing those, and then there are complaints about the time around those things. So these are, tricky issues where you get into a bit of a vicious circle. Clearly, however, we need to reflect on those statistics and put in action plans in place around how we recover it. I don't think it is purely, frankly, a question of putting it into the complaints process. It is actually to get to the root of the issue in the first place, and to actually try and see if we can dry it up at source, rather than trying to deal with the symptom of it. And then lastly, at FOIs, I thought there was a statement in there actually. So
page 45.
Yes, okay, and they have gone broadly in the right direction there. I think we've got some improvement to processes there, which are helping.
Okay, Councillor Firth.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chair. Actually, funny enough, I wanted to cover those particular two areas because I thought it would be quite helpful to go back to last year's results and actually look back to 2020 as well to compare. I just want to ask one particular question to start off with, which is to do with a healthy workforce. Back in June 2021, we had just within the council an average days per full-time equivalent of 9.8. And obviously now that's increased to 14.68. If you include schools, you go from 11.37 in June 2021 to September 2022 of 13.32. Obviously, given the circumstances and obviously the continual effects of the pandemic more generally and workloads, is there anything in particular that we can add to add some rationale to why that's increasing, or even more what the council's actually doing given the significant wellbeing offer that we do ensure we promote to staff? Thank you.
Yes, I think there are two things going on there. So clearly there has been an impact of COVID itself in terms of numbers of days lost. And what you see actually, if you get into more of the fine detail of it actually, is that there's been very little increase, is pretty much steady on the position of staff who are working in offices and who also have the opportunity to work from home. And what you've seen is quite a large increase in the number of frontline absence. And I think there's probably a couple of things running behind that. Most of us probably have had COVID at some time. I had it during the summer. And I was able to work from home and work through it, and it's not recorded in any absence details because it wasn't there. Had I been a refuse worker, I neither would have been fit enough to have completed the round, nor would it have been responsible to sat in a cab with other people doing that work. So I think there are people who've got COVID of being able to work through it often in offices, but not on that front line. I think secondly, though, there has been an issue, and there was an issue went through the peak of COVID where we weren't doing face-to-face meetings with staff who had long-term absence. There was actually a trade union agreement with the trade union to suspend some of that work. And unfortunately, then if somebody is off absent for some time, it's actually then quite difficult to actually return them to the workplace unless you deal with that issue quite quickly. And I think some of that discipline of the way that we manage that absence did fall away somewhat through that pandemic period. And what we're seeing now is really a quite determined effort to re-establish that, so that actually people are being contacted, re-engaged. And what we're beginning to see actually over this last number of months is quite a significant reduction in the number of long-term absent people, which actually contributes quite significantly to the high level of absence that you're seeing in that statistic. So you're seeing also that we've actually put some commitments into the budget for next year to actually see that absence come down. And obviously this board wants to track that we're successful in doing that. But hopefully that's an explanation of why we got into the position which we have, but also some, I think, indication that we can now turn that round.
Thank you, Neil. No, I think the staggering point was the fact that between the 12 months up to June 2021 to then the 12 months up to September 2022, the average FTE off went up by 4.9 days. And I appreciate that at the same time that the figures don't always show what's happening on the ground, but at the same time, that's still quite an interesting figure. The reason I also add is the fact that back when we last reviewed this back in January last year, we also had further details on the breakdown whereby 36% from the 12 months up to June were due to mental health, for example. Would hope that in the future that can be provided in the reports if possible to make sure that we can analyse in more depth. But I appreciate you've given that further detail there. Just moving on slightly to what Councillor Flynn was talking about with the local suppliers and SMEs and a target of around about 52% of orders being placed with local suppliers. Although Councillor Flynn said one thing, I actually have looked at the figures, and if you look between July to September 2020, we were at 52%. Same again at July to September 2021, but then July to September 2022, that dropped by about 5%. We roughly had the same amount in terms of cash being spent with local suppliers, but is there any particular incidents or potential factors that you think that are at play why potentially our percentage base has not increased with local suppliers over that yearly period? Sorry, it has gone down by 5%. Thank you.
I don't really have an indication of those particular movements. I will inquire with procurement team whether that's just a natural kind of variation. It doesn't seem like so huge. There's not to be explained by just some natural variation. But I will inquire.
Yes, super. Thank you very much, Neil. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Almas now.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of low carbon emission and zero carbon targets, I know we can only go so much into the details of it. It's simply a request to have more information in terms of breakdown further ward-wise, if possible. So if you could pass on my request in terms of having that detailed information. So, for example, you know, the EPC standards C or below, we're still very low. I know we've come a long way in terms of our meeting targets and so on, and there's some years left as well to make some rapid progress and whatever. But I'd be really interested in terms of getting that kind of information and breakdown. Would it be the Health and Wellbeing Board, or where to request that information in terms of breakdown ward-wise, just to look at, for example, some of the deprived inner city wards as to how, if you like, carbon efficient they are, and what support, especially in terms of social housing, is being provided. Because I know in places like Holbeck and so on, there's a lot of good work going on in priority neighborhoods and so on. But I'd be very interested to find out what really is the kind of breakdown and mix in terms of social housing, the privately owned and rented properties, just to compare apples with apples. But in terms of looking at other cities, we're still quite under the target in terms of comparisons. Thank you.
Yeah, I have worked with the Sustainable Energy team. Obviously, we've got the climate emergency scrutiny work going through, and maybe they can have a look at it. It might be useful, I think, maybe to distinguish between those things which are directly under the control of the council, where we clearly have seen very significant reductions in our own use of gas within our own buildings. We were seeing very significant investments within the multi-storey stock that the council owns, which is shifting those towards district heating and to ground source heat pumps, as against what's happening in the private rented sector and the owner occupied sector, where there has been clearly less progress. So maybe we could distinguish between those things which are directly under our control, if you like, and those things which we seek to influence. But I'll see if we can draw those things out for you.
I mean, how can we support in terms of and offer support, increasing our influence in terms of other, for example, privately rented and owned properties as well as a city? How can we offer that support? Probably would be the best way of looking at a situation like that.
Well, as you refer to, we've done some work both Cross Green and now more recently in the recreations in Holbeck, which has kind of really improved those particular areas. But they are very much dependent on we put some money in, but also some grant to achieve it. The rest of it, in a way, is probably more about a lobby around government kind of positions on the licensing of private rented, and also what incentives may be put in place to actually incentivize owner occupiers to actually invest in their properties. We are doing some interesting work on the latter, by the way, with a number of companies and government looking at some pilot work around that opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Gruen.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Firth picked up one of my points, which was the sickness absence, so I won't raise that again. But the other thing that caught my eye was the council tax collection rates, which are on page 44. A huge difference between our target and what we've actually achieved. And there is a reason given below that. But I just wondered if you wanted to comment further in terms of how quickly we're likely to catch up. I couldn't help myself thinking that with the 14 million in-year deficit, what difference would reaching our target make to that, for example?
Thank you, Chair.
Victoria, could you just introduce yourself because you've come to the table since we did the introductions at the start? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Bradshaw. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the council, and I'm responsible for the revenues team who collect the council tax and business rates. When this report was produced, we were behind on the collection of the council tax, and we are still slightly behind where we were this time last year. However, the teams have been busy making payments. They were doing the energy payments, etc., and therefore the focus was on that rather than on the collection, even though they were collecting what they could within the resources we had available. Also, the courts have not gone back to pre-COVID levels, so we're not seeing the summons as well as we were doing previously. Now that is changing, so we're seeing the number of summons that are going through the courts increasing, so that the frequency of those taking place is also increasing. So I am expecting those collection rates to come up in the fullness of time, and we'll get back to a position where we were pre-COVID. However, obviously the cost of living now, we're starting to feel that, but the team are actively pursuing them. So as I've said, over the time, I am expecting it to come back to where we were. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. That's really helpful. Do you have any idea about when we might reach that point of returning to where we were?
We have left the collection rates where they were for next financial year, 23-24. That's where we were, but obviously we're monitoring the position very closely. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Victoria. Okay, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. On page 34, in the summary of the report, it says there are no key risks, which may be the case for the report as a whole, but within the appendice, so appendix 2 in the performance summary, there are obviously some great risks among not meeting the targets and so on. And one I also want to focus on were the complaints rate, really. So am I correct in saying the risk is if we don't do an in-time stage 1, stage 2 complaint, that they can then go to the Ombudsman after so long? Or am I wrong about that? Because they're the sort of risks that I see developing there.
Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, I think in the first comment perhaps to make in terms of the risk, I mean, obviously what we've put in that sentence there, it's a monitoring report, and obviously we bring the annual risk report and do risk reporting kind of separate, but there's a real strong feed in. So you're absolutely right. A lot of the risk that we would pick up on these performance issues would feed into the risk report. We just haven't incorporated that here. In terms of the risk on compliance, Neil mentioned some of this before. We are bringing this report for a conversation with the directors on the 31st of January, recognising that, there are some challenges at the moment, and just making sure that right across the piece that we've got a grip on that. In terms of your question about going to the Ombudsman, it's a customer choice about going to the Ombudsman rather than automatically, if we don't do stage 1 and stage 2 in time, that they would automatically go. Although clearly, the more dissatisfied a customer, I guess the more likely we are to have an Ombudsman complaint, which, like Neil said before, it is in our interest to try and nip these in the bud, because if we do get more Ombudsman complaints, it actually takes even more work to respond to those, and it means we've perhaps not met people's requirements, but it's a complex one.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, that's what I did worry about, really. But just in terms of going to the Ombudsman, do they not have to exhaust stages 1 and 2 before the Ombudsman will sort of entertain generally?
Yeah, you do, and as I say, it has to be an active customer engagement with the Ombudsman. Do have to have exhausted all internal routes, which as we know are slightly different for adults and children's to the rest of the council, given the different statutory bases. And you're right, an Ombudsman wouldn't entertain one of those until those routes were exhausted. And we obviously continue to report ombudsman cases through to exec board when we get them.
Super, thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Burke.
Thanks, Chair. I do appreciate that the report says it'll be coming back to scrutiny in June 23, so I'm maybe preempting something that's already decided. I'm particularly interested in the breakthrough priorities. So they are listed, they are detailed-ish. I wonder if when it comes back, or perhaps we could have a members update or a board update. I'm particularly interested in promoting mental health in the community and the better homes for wellbeing. In fact, all 5 of them. I'd just like some more detail. So if we could start with the promoting mental health in the community, I don't know if anybody could perhaps put some more meat on the bones, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. As I say, there is an appendix in there where we've given sort of snapshot information. Happy to come back if the board wishes to receive sort of more detailed accounts of the work ongoing under each of those projects. Happy to bring that back. I'd need to go and wait and talk to the project leads. But certainly what we've included in the paper here attempts to give at least an overview of the work that's ongoing, the latest stage, and then the next steps as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's obviously we're keen to promote this work within all our wards. I'm sure I speak for all my colleagues. So the more information, and I do have a particular interest in mental health. So obviously that's for the chair to decide. But Andrew, if we could have some more detail, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, I'll certainly ask Rob to take that up and work with Mike on it. Obviously, the June board hasn't been decided on who's going to be on it because there's an election in between now and then. But we can certainly pass it on even if we're not on the board then. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Just 2 quick ones. On the procurement and supporting local businesses, is the target for percentage of orders placed with local suppliers volume or value of contracts, or is that included in? Is it just encompassing the whole lot? And on doing business fairly, the 30 days that we pay within receipt, is that 30 working days or 30 days? That's it. Thanks.
Thanks. In terms of the 30 days, I'd need to check that with the procurement service, and I'm quite happy to provide a response on that. It's similar with the target as well, so I'm quite happy to do that and come back to you on that.
Super, thank you very much. Just from me, I know you've consulted on us before about what should be in the KPIs, but reading the paper this time, I didn't see anything on sort of the social value KPI, and I know that's something we've been working quite hard on in procurement. And then the other aspect I'd quite like to see in terms of our suppliers is those who pay tax, are they paying tax fairly? And I don't know if there's a way we can find a way to make sure, and for me, it links very much to social value and being responsible business. So just maybe that's a comment to take away going forwards. Okay, so I can't see anyone else indicating, so I'm going to close this item. Thank you very much for coming. I think that was really helpful report and really useful KPIs, which we can keep working on as you develop this piece of work. Okay, on to the next item, which is page 59 of the pack. Let me just get there, if that's all right. Okay, so this is financial health monitoring. So I think Victoria's here to speak about that. As always, you can assume we've read the paper, but if there's anything in particular you want to draw out, please do.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the position at month 7, October, and we're forecasting an overspend of 15.4 million at that time. The main areas of the overspend are children's and families. We've got an overspend in resources and then a slight underspend in strategic. The savings plans in the majority are on target to be achieved, and that was 16.5 million of saving plans that were assumed in the 22-23 budget. There is a shortfall on the passenger transport saving, because we are seeing the numbers increasing that are coming through requiring transport, and also the procurement saving of 2 million. We have seen a reduction in the non-essential spend at month 7, and that's 7.5% lower than the same period in 21-22, and that's due to the actions that we've put in place around freezing non-essential spend. The HR rate at the moment is projecting a balanced position, and as was highlighted in the previous item, the council tax and business rates are below collection rates for previous years. However, we are working hard to resolve that. I think those are the main points, Chair. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. Can I go open this up to questions from members? Start with Councillor Gruen.
A really general question from me. In all the briefings that we've had on the savings plans, for example, it's been the directorate presenting on its own budget gaps and its own spending proposals. Has any thought been given to not just containing it each within each directorate, but actually working cross-directorate? So some directorates save more to the advantage of perhaps more sensitive services, because that hasn't come across in the briefings that we've had.
Thank you, Chair. What we do through the summer is we work through all through the year, but it's focused through the summer on the savings proposals required for the next financial year. And we have a weekly meeting that's called the Best Council Financial Challenge Group, which has representatives from each of the directorates on. And we work as a team, looking at where the pressures are, how we can make those savings. And then those are presented to Executive Board in September, this year, October and December. But we do a number of cross-council initiatives. So the procurement saving, for example, there's a lot of the innovation from the IT IDS work that we're undertaking. So there is a lot of cross work as well happening, but we work as a team across all directorates. Thank you.
But that's where we're doing a whole council initiative, for example, the IT developments that you've just referred to. I was just meaning, would it ever be appropriate to take more out of one directorate because it's harder to make savings in another? I appreciate the whole council initiatives, but I'm actually saying, would you actually consider one directorate compensating for another?
What we tend to do is we have a discussion at the beginning of the year around how we're going to mitigate the budget gap that's been identified. And we look at the pressures from the different directorates, and then we work together on how we're going to manage that across. Naturally, some services identify more savings, and some savings where there's demand, and social care potentially less. And that works its way through, and that's how we go through. And we do ask sometimes for other directorates to make more so that we can balance the budget. Thanks.
Thank you. That's where I was coming from.
Neil, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of historical trends, I mean, what you're seeing is actually there's been a general shift over the years towards social care departments, towards adult social care and children and social care, as those sort of statutory responsibilities have pressed on all councils, and you know, we reflect that too. So we have shifted. But it's not been like stayed still, Councillor Gruen, and it's not been static. It has shifted year in, year out, and clearly, when we balance at the end of the year, it's based on all the departments' budgets, not single departmental budgets. But I would say that what is important is still to have some budget accountability. And I think that probably works well in terms of actually keeping disciplines going, which are required. And if you leave it to everybody, then everybody has a reason not to do it. So you have to balance those things out.
Super, thank you very much. So I can't see anyone else indicating, so I'm going to move seamlessly on to item 10, which is the budget for 23-24. I just think it's worth, in your introductory words, Victor, just be worth just being really clear about where we are from our knowledge in terms of settlement from national government, how much we actually know would be helpful in terms of to make our decisions.
Thank you, Chair. So this report recommends the 23-24 budget for consultation, and it includes proposals around the HRA and the capital programme, and it also details the dedicated school grant allocations. We've had a net increase in revenue budget of 35.2 million. That's after the additional resources that we've identified from council tax and business rates. Identification of pressures, which includes a 4% pay increase, the demand increases and inflation, and then the savings proposals that have been put forward for consultation of 69.8 million. The report assumes council tax for general purposes at 2.99% and the adult social care precept at 1.99% and additional income from business rates of 15.3 million. There is a capital programme review that's been undertaken, and that was to manage the additional requirements within the borrowing that we currently have, and that any additional borrowing would be to cover delivery of savings. That will be presented at February Executive Board. The details of the savings proposals are contained within the report, and also Executive Board considered the application to form a business rates pool for next year with 5 West Yorkshire authorities and York, and that's gone through. So at the moment we got the provisional settlement, and we did identify additional resources to what we had in the budget that went to a December Executive Board of 4.6 million. However, we don't stop doing the budget when it goes to Executive Board. We're working on it through November and December, and a number of pressures were identified. There were a number of grants that were rolled into RSG, which was 1.2 million, which reduces really that 4.6 down to 3.4. We've known there's pressures on children's and families transport because of the numbers of education, health and care plans that are coming through. So we've had to put in additional resources around there. When we've had some pay, when we've done the pay increases, we needed to increase some of the casual staff's pay, etc. So we've included that, and we've identified from this financial year and looking forward around the savings proposal around procurement, because of the levels of inflation that are coming through, that it's not achievable. And therefore we have identified 8.3 million of pressures, which has used that additional resource, and we will be making an allocation from reserves to balance that off. So that's where we are, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to be clear then, so we're setting our budget in February, but we don't have the final settlement details yet.
Not at the moment, Chair, no. Thank you.
That's what I thought. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. I can't see anyone indicating, so I'll start with my own question. It's just about inflation. Clearly, inflation is going to be is unknown and is quite material in terms of the cost. I just wanted to get your sense of how resilient we are if inflation is higher than we budgeted for.
We will be monitoring the position as we have done in this financial year. We have provided for inflation at CPI and RPI on the contracts that we're required to from September, and we will be reporting on a monthly basis. If inflation does become high, we will have to look at action throughout the year, as we've done this year, and look at reducing our spend to manage within those approved budgets.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Just to turn to page 135, and it's point 3.3.1, where we talk about us having a great economy, basically, despite the difficulties of COVID and Brexit and whatnot. And we see from the cranes that are out there how well we appear to be doing. However, that's not manifesting itself up to now in business rates growth, really, which is one of the things that we look to fund our services with, don't we, as the other government grants have been reduced. So I just wondered, and I remember actually when I subbed on Infrastructure and Scrutiny Board raising this issue, Eve, about flatlined business rate growth. And then when I read this, I thought, crikey, isn't that what I said back in whenever it was, 2019? So, yeah, I just wondered if that is solely down to the lack of the 100% business rate growth retention or some other factor, because what does strike me is there's lots of growth in the city centre of student accommodation, which doesn't bring in business rates, does it really? So is it the right kind of growth to help us with our finances going forward to meet all the demands that are now forced upon us by the 13 years now of austerity, government austerity?
Does anyone want to try and answer that? Okay, Victoria.
Okay, thank you, Chair. When we've done the business rates growth, we are looking at the totality. So there are cranes in the city, and we have had some increases in the businesses that are coming in. However, when we've looked at some of the smaller businesses, etc., then we've had to look at those businesses that aren't continuing, and that has affected the income to the council. As you've said, some of the student accommodation is liable to council tax, which is then exempt, not business rates. So that's where we are really on the forecasting.
Chair, just by way of introduction, I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy. I'm Eve Roothouse. Just in relation to sort of the broader economic side, I think there are some significant office developments that are coming forwards in the city centre, for example, on the South Bank. And I think as those come to completion, there'll be a number that complete in this year. We should see then the business rates coming through from them. So yes, a lot of student developments, but also some significant office developments in the city. Just informal kind of feedback indicates that following kind of COVID-19, a lot of offices are kind of moving around the city as well. So what's happening is that companies are looking for the right office space for them in the city following changing sort of working patterns. And so that will also probably settle in this year, kind of seeing how all of that moves around. But there is a lot of positivity overall in the economy in Leeds still remaining. The digital sector is the fastest growing digital sector in the UK at the moment. But what we need to kind of remember and focus on is, as ever, inclusive growth and making sure that growth is kind of shared across the economy.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to make a comment and ask another question, if that's all right. So just on the contact centre, I note that on page 45 of our pack, we talked about it earlier and we didn't actually talk about it, but in the KPIs, there's an improvement on the contact centre performance, which is really positive. And clearly there's a potential savings in that. I know we talked about this in the session briefing before Christmas. Just like to, assuming if I'm still chair next year, that's something that we will be watching as a board to keep an eye on, that to check that performance keeps going in the right direction. And I say that as a comment because I just want to let you know. The other question I just wanted to touch on is actually Councillor Chapman raised it in the pre-Christmas question about postage and how much we spend on postage and replication of budget. So I guess the question for me is, do we know how much we spend as a council on postage overall? And is that split between directorates? And I guess in my head, there's a real question around we did a lot of work on the amount we printed in the last few years, and I think there's been some real results from that work. And real savings in terms of how much we spend printing, and wondered if that could be replicated in the postage.
Make a couple of comments. So on the contact centre, the contact centre proposals are predicated on keeping performance up. So I'll be checking our proposals to make sure that they do that, and having discussions with Councillor Cooper and others, and just in the run up to the council to just double check those, because it isn't proposed to be done at the expense of service. In respect to printing and postage, printing, I will confirm for you, but I believe it's come down by around about 80% actually. So a huge reduction in the last number of years, through which we've made a lot of savings. Clearly, there are still opportunities to get other things online. I know Councillor Chapman has given me some examples of things which he's received unnecessarily through the post, and we can still improve that. I think we will see through some of the improvements which we're making, for example, in council tax, where it's been quite tricky to sort of change details yourself online. We're now making changes there, and not unsurprisingly, a lot of people, when they go into that, then elect to actually receive their council bill via email rather than through the post. So we will start to see, I think, improvements in those areas too. There's certainly still some way to go, but some incredibly and good improvements on the printing side.
Sorry, it's interesting about the council tax, because I'd be happy to take my council tax bill electronically, but I've never seen anything asking me if I would want to do that. So it might be you get it through people that are contacting you to change something, but what about the rest of us that just get the bill every April and stick it in a cupboard for a year and then chuck it away? Just a thought.
Yes, I think strategically there's a question about how much each department spends on postage, and then some thought about where we can save it. For example, like the example Councillor Chapman makes, it's clearly you could just put a link that says, if you're happy to receive this electronically, bish bash bosh.
I think there are. So I think the council tax one is an interesting area, and yeah, I do get mine through email. You can, if you persevere, get it done. But it's now easier to do it, and I think we will start to see a shift around that. There are going to be some things like elections which are actually related to statute and so forth, and actually there is no way around that. And I think actually that will probably in the end, it forms already a very, very significant part of our bill. So there will be a certainly irreducible amount, but there are some areas where we can see an impact, and council tax I think will probably be the one to concentrate on in the immediate future.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to touch the current political hot potato that is the proposal to introduce car parking charges at attractions and public parks. There's been a lot mentioned today about inclusive growth, and we've talked about crushing health inequalities, and all of us, I'm sure, are receiving multiple correspondence and emails from concerned residents from across the city who are worried about the accessibility of their public parks and also trying to improve their own personal lives. I have two particular facilities that have been raised with me. Lotherton, where we already charge to use the facilities and also potentially to get into the park in the first place. And also Temple Newsham with both Home Farm and the house, and also the astronomically costed 3.6 million new play barn that's being built that will also increase the actual tickets cost to actually get into the farm itself. Factored in all of that, has it been factored in how much of an impact the increase of car parking charges will have on the revenue of people actually using those attractions and those facilities that are so desperately needed to keep our budgets in check?
Thank you, Chair. The car park proposal's been put in for a number of reasons. The actual charge that's being proposed is a minimal charge, and the investment that will be enabled into the actual car parking facilities and also the park's attractions will help to fund some of that. So it is an initiative to give benefit as well as actually a charge for the facilities. Thank you.
Can I ask how it can be a benefit if we're also then increasing the charges to get into the attractions at the same time, and therefore there's a double whammy being hit by the residents or visitors trying to use them, and also with the situation that if we're wanting to attract people in from outside of Leeds that may also face the same inequalities that we face here in this city, may also be charged because they don't actually live in Leeds.
The additional charge to the attractions already in operation are not part of that proposal that's contained in this report. It's a separate proposal.
Yes, so I think that I understand your point, Councillor. I think it's a comment which is a fair comment, challenge to, and I'm sure you can raise an amendment in the budget. I guess there is a political question here, which I don't really think it's fair for the officer to comment on. But yeah, I'll let you come back up to me.
No, thank you, Chair. I asked the question whether it's been factored in, whether it may impact the overall revenue at those attractions, and that was the answer that was given. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess what I'll do is I'll make sure, I mean, Councillor Cooper's hearing a comment, and so she's aware, and I'm sure the exec board have considered the budget as a whole. Okay, any further questions? No, Councillor Ritchie, final question.
Well, just to say that element of the budget is still under consultation, and I think that's an important point to make. And previous consultations, that feedback has been listened to and taken on board when affordable, such as I think district parking in previous years and what have you. So I'm sure things will be taken on. My own personal view is, in terms of the investment at Temple Newsham, for example, which is making it a real tourist destination go-to park, it's probably, I'm sure the officers are checking its value in comparison with equivalent offers throughout the country, really. They usually do comparisons to ensure that it's competitively priced and so on. But I do think if I'm a visitor to Temple Newsham, and I'd expect to perhaps buy a coffee and a cake at the lovely cafe there, bit of advertising for them, highly recommend it. An extra £1 or whatever, £2, I don't think would have the same impact as it might have actually in a community park, which I'm sure will be taken into consideration during the consultation.
Yeah, okay, Councillor Firth.
All I can say, Councillor Ritchie, is that in relation to previous consultations, if the significant opposition that was faced then was so significant that it was then taken out as a proposal, that should have been forthcoming in then realising that this one was going to be just as opposed as those previously.
Okay, we made our comments. I just think, Councillor Cooper, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for allowing me to come in there, because I was looking actually for some paperwork that I had on my laptop around looking at various other cities, and if we look at core cities and they're charging for major parks and attractions within their core cities, the proposal that is before us that we're talking about is very minimum charge of 40p an hour. And as Councillor Ritchie said, and I mentioned earlier in the meeting, this is there are two layers to this, to the budget consultation, the initial budget consultation that we've already had, and then there will be individual service reviews, which I would imagine following the budget consultation, the service reviews are going to come out fairly swiftly, and that car parking charges at Parks and Countryside will be part of that service review. And then I'm happy to take comment from Scrutiny Board on that. If I can just make a point about Temple Newsham and Councillor Firth's comment on the astronomical cost of the introduction of a play ban there. Ward members, and as a ward member for Temple Newsham, we have absolutely fought for additional investment in Temple Newsham to increase the visitors to that attraction. That's a citywide attraction, you know, to enable it to thrive and survive. And play barn is something that has been wanted by many local residents, I have to say, with somewhere they can take their children in the winter and really enjoy those amenities. I do think that Councillor Firth was making political points here at Scrutiny, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to do that further in council in February when we actually set the budget. These, you must remember, are merely proposals at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess the only other comment I'd make on that item is it's possible, not likely, but possible the government could improve the funding offer, so the City of Leeds gets the funding it deserves, and then we could reverse a number of things that we don't want to do, but the administration is being forced to do because of budget cuts. And okay, so I'm going to move on now. So thank you very much, officers, for coming. Really appreciate your time. I think we've had an interesting debate, and hopefully you've noted the comments from the board. So the board will now move on to the work programme. So I think there's just a couple of comments from Rob to start with, and then I'll accept questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just very briefly, I already referenced the potential working group on equality, diversity and inclusion. So members are aware of that, and I will get in touch with you as soon as possible with dates for that. Also conscious that some members are not available totally throughout February, so I will bear that in mind as I arrange that. And then secondly, the work programme item does list in March that we will bring forward a report on the peer challenge, the LGA peer challenge, subject to consultation with colleagues. I think that's now likely to come forward at our next meeting in February. So just to make members aware of that, and the plan will also be to ensure that other scrutiny chairs are invited to attend that, so that all remits are covered under that peer challenge item. I think that's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Any comments from members? No, super. Thank you very much for coming today. I think we've had a really efficient meeting compared to what we normally do. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Okay, take care.